This is History Unit 1, Lesson 11, comparing two presidential speeches. So in this lesson, students are going to read an excerpt from Kennedy's Civil Rights Address, and then they're going to read an excerpt from Lyndon Johnson's Great Society speech. They're also going to read a portion of the Civil Rights textbook chapter that covers the time between those two speeches. And when students have finished reading it, they're going to explain the differences in the two speeches. This is how the task is laid out for students. So they're going to be asked to identify similarities and differences in the two speeches and explain those differences using information about sourcing and contextualization. And also they're going to determine whether or not they can explain the differences using the contextual information in the documents or whether there's some other explanation for those differences. One of the things that they are going to learn in this lesson is about G-Sprite. G-Sprite is a strategy that helps students understand the speeches in terms of those different societal functions that we have talked about before. So G stands for geographic, S stands for social, P for political, R for religious, I for ideological or intellectual, T for technological, and E for economic. This is an interesting lesson because the lesson introduces students to a genre that they may not have encountered before, and that genre is a speech. So speeches have particular ways of laying out information that you won't find in other kinds of documents. You're going to have to emphasize that they are different and have students think about the features of presidential speeches that make them a unique kind of genre. So, what does a president have to do with a speech like that? Well, they set goals, they discuss tactics, they roll out policies, they inspire, etc. And they have a particular format that they usually follow. So the strategy of soapstone will help students source and contextualize these two speeches, and it'll help them think about the purpose for each of these speeches. The chapter is going to help students decide what might be responsible for the difference in the two speeches. Remember, after they read the speeches, they're going to read an excerpt from the chapter, and that will be discussing what took place between those two. Again, this is what G-Sprite stands for: geographical, social, political, religious, intellectual, or ideological, technological, and economic. And what historians do is when they look at the past, they think about these different aspects of societal functioning to help them analyze what is going on in a more fine-grained way than just thinking about the chronological events themselves. So note that the difference in the two speeches is actually helping students to think about the changes over time, the time between those two speeches. And change over time is a really hard concept for students. G-Sprite is going to help them analyze the way things changed. So if they are unfamiliar with this, of course, it will need to be modeled. Students should engage in some group practice and feedback before they can work on their own. So you might take a portion of the speech a little bit and then have students model it for students, take another little portion of a speech, have students practice, etc. And until you're comfortable that the group is by and large getting the idea and can do it themselves. So they can actually listen to the beginnings of the speeches if they want to. There are, in the teacher's guide, there's a link to the YouTube sites where they can listen to them. And in Activity 1, they can listen to the beginning to give them some idea of what's coming up. They can discuss the soapstone procedure. They can think about speeches as a genre. They can discuss how they compare and contrast two things over time, and they can learn how to use GSprite. So as I said, the speeches are located online, and if you don't want to take time to do this, that's okay. Students can also just read the first paragraph or so of the speeches together to give them some idea about the genre of speech. In Activity 2, they're going to be reading the chapter information. So what they're going to do is they're going to read the sections of the chapter in groups. They're going to annotate. They're going to use GSprite. And if they help students find an answer to the essential question, they're going to add it to their organized notes. Remember, they're keeping this idea of the essential question all throughout the unit. So every time they find something, they're going to put that in their notes. So this reading can be divided up depending upon students' ability to handle long sections of text. It is kind of a long section of a text. And you can also have students do it for homework if that is better for you and you know students are going to be doing it. It's a decision that you will make. The text itself is going to tell students about what happened between the two speeches. And it's really important to note, for students to note, that the chronology and what kinds of changes were taking place, that is, whether they were political, economic, social. That's why that GSprite activity is going to be important. In Activity 3, they're going to be discussing the text, significant events. They're thinking about the actors, their goals, their tactics, whether these were successful or not. They're going to determine if goals, or their tactics were political, social, economic, etc. And what you need to know about this is that you might make a chart and put these headings on the chart for each event: actors, goals, tactics, GSprite category. So when students are discussing the text, you can be putting those things up there, and then when you're finished with that discussion, they will have something that they can look back to help them make meaning of the past. So students are also going to be determining what changed between the two speeches. So they need to find places in the text to talk about the changes in the civil rights movement. And if students get stuck on this, there are 3 quotes, and these 3 quotes are provided in the teacher's guide. You can put them up there, and that should help students figure out what kind of changes took place. So they're doing this all before they actually read the 2 presidential speeches. And remember, what they're going to do is they're going to compare the 2 speeches, and there's a chart in the academic notebook that will help them with this comparison. They're going to identify some thought-provoking sentences. They're going to determine if the differences in speeches can be explained by the information in the chapter. So the chart that's in the teacher's guide and also in the academic notebook helps students think about sourcing and contextualization and GSprite categories as a way to make the comparisons between the 2 speeches more analytical. And there are 2 excerpts there. These 2 excerpts of the speeches allow for an in-depth comparison contrast of them. The activity of figuring out how to explain the differences is difficult for students, and they'll probably need you to model the thinking necessary to complete that part of the academic notebook graphic organizer. Also note that there are some assessment rubrics in there. It might be important for you to take a look at the assessment rubrics and also help students to maybe even share them with students. So that's the end of Lesson 11, and we're getting close to the end of Unit 1, so students should be reading longer sections now. They should be able to tackle the kinds of things that are important to history And at this time, you should be seeing some development of the idea of historical argumentation.